You're making $75,000 a year. On paper, you're doing better than 60% of Americans. You should feel comfortable, maybe even successful. But instead, you're checking your bank account every other day, calculating whether you can afford groceries and gas this week, and wondering why the hell you still feel broke. Here's the brutal truth. Your $75,000 in 2026 has the buying power of $40,000 from just 5 years ago. And if you don't understand why this is happening, you're going to keep feeling poor no matter how many raises you get. My name is Alex, and I'm a 32-year-old software engineer who spent the last few years obsessing over why people like us, people who should be comfortable, are barely keeping their heads above water. I analyze income data, inflation metrics, and real-world cost increases because I refuse to accept that making good money means we should still struggle. If you're tired of feeling broke despite earning a decent salary and you want to understand the actual math behind why everything feels impossible right now, hit that subscribe button. And if this video helps you see your financial situation more clearly, give it a thumbs up so more people can find it. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you felt genuinely comfortable with your paycheck? Not rich, not living large, just comfortable. Where you didn't have to think twice about buying groceries, getting your car fixed, or taking a weekend trip without calculating whether it would destroy your budget for the month. For most people earning $75,000 in 2026, that feeling doesn't exist anymore. And here's what makes this so frustrating. If you told someone from 2019 that you're making $75,000, they'd probably congratulate you. They'd assume you're doing well, building wealth, maybe even thinking about buying a house. But you and I both know the reality is very, very different. Here's what's actually happening, and this is where the numbers get scary. In 2019, the median household income in America was about $68,700. Adjusting for inflation using the official consumer price index, that same purchasing power in 2026 requires roughly $89,000. But wait, it gets worse. The CPI, that's the government's official inflation measurement, massively understates what's actually happening to your cost of living. The CPI uses something called hedonic adjustments and substitution effects. Basically, if steak gets too expensive, they assume you'll just buy chicken instead, and they call that no real inflation. Your computer is twice as fast as last year's model, they'll adjust the price down because you're getting more value. It's statistical gymnastics that makes inflation look smaller than what you're actually experiencing at the grocery store, the gas pump, and your rent payment. When you look at the real costs that matter, housing, food, healthcare, childcare, education, the inflation rate is much, much higher than the official numbers. This is why $75,000 in 2026 feels like $40,000 from 2019. Not because you're bad with money, not because you're overspending, but because the purchasing power of your income has been systematically destroyed while the official statistics pretend everything's fine. Let's start with the biggest wealth killer: housing. In 2019, the median home price in the United States was about $320,000. Today, in 2026, that same median home costs roughly $420,000. That's a 31% increase. But here's where the math gets absolutely brutal. Back in 2019, mortgage rates were hovering around 3.5% to 4%. Today, even after some fluctuations, rates are sitting around 6.5% to 7%. Let me show you what this actually means for your monthly payment. A $320,000 home with 20% down at 3.75% interest meant a monthly payment of about $1,185 for principal and interest. That same scenario today, $420,000 home with 20% down at 6.75%, costs you $2,172 per month. Your monthly housing payment has increased by 83%, not 31% to match the home price increase, not even 50%, a full 83% more. And that's assuming you have $84,000 sitting around for that 20% down payment, which most people don't. If you're putting down less, your payment is even higher. Plus, you're paying PMI insurance on top of everything else. But wait, we're not done. Property taxes have increased dramatically in most areas. Homeowners insurance has skyrocketed, especially in states dealing with climate-related events. HOA fees keep climbing. The total cost of homeownership has increased far beyond what the sticker price suggests. And if you're renting, don't think you're escaping this. The average rent in America has increased from about $1,465 in 2019 to over $2,150 in 2026. That's a 47% increase. Nearly half your income goes to housing before you've bought a single gallon of milk. Here's the thing that really drives this home. The traditional rule was that you should spend no more than 30% of your gross income on housing. For someone making $75,000, that's $1,875 per month. Show me where you're finding that housing in any major city in America. You can't. The average person making $75,000 is now spending 35% to 45% of their income just to keep a roof over their head. That extra 10 to 15% might not sound like much, but it's the difference between building wealth and treading water forever. Now let's talk about something you experience every single week, groceries. In 2019, the average American household spent about $4,460 per year on groceries. By 2026, that number has exploded to approximately $6,800. That's a 52% increase in what you're spending just to feed yourself and your family. But those are just averages, and averages hide the real story. Let's look at specific items you actually buy. A dozen eggs that cost $1.50 in 2019, you're paying $2.80 to $3.50 now, depending on where you live. That's over a 100% increase. Ground beef went from $3.77 per pound to $5.80. Chicken breast jumped from $3.28 per pound to $4.90. A gallon of milk increased from $3.04 to $4.20. And here's what makes this so insidious. These aren't luxury items. This isn't about cutting back on caviar and champagne. We're talking about eggs, milk, and chicken, the basics, the things you need to make a simple meal at home. Even when you're trying to be frugal, even when you're meal planning and using coupons and buying generic brands, you're still spending dramatically more than you were just a few years ago. The psychological impact of this cannot be overstated. Every time you go to the grocery store, you're reminded that your money doesn't go as far as it used to. You're doing mental calculations about whether you can afford the better quality meat or if you need to downgrade. You're putting items back on the shelf because your cart total is higher than you planned. This constant financial stress isn't just uncomfortable, it's exhausting. It's death by 1,000 cuts. And each cut happens at the checkout line. Let's move on to something you probably don't think about as much, but is quietly destroying your budget: transportation. In 2019, the average price of a new car was about $36,000. Today in 2026, that average has jumped to over $48,000. That's a 33% increase. But just like with housing, the sticker price is only part of the story. Car loan interest rates have increased significantly. Insurance costs have exploded. The average full coverage auto insurance premium went from about $1,570 per year in 2019 to over $2,400 in 2026. That's an additional $830 per year just to keep your car legal. Gas prices? In 2019, the national average was around $2.60 per gallon. Today, it's fluctuating between $3.50 and $4.20, depending on where you live and what's happening globally. If you're driving 12,000 miles per year in a car that gets 25 miles per gallon, you've gone from spending about $1,250 per year on gas to over $1,850. That's $600 more annually just to get to work, run errands, and live your life. Maintenance and repair costs have increased too. Parts are more expensive, labor rates have gone up, and cars are more complex than ever, requiring specialized tools and knowledge. That routine $300 repair from 2019, it's $450 to $500 now. Add it all up, and the total cost of owning and operating a vehicle has increased by 40 to 50% over the past few years. For someone making $75,000, that's an enormous chunk of your budget that just disappeared without you necessarily realizing it was happening. Now let's talk about all the other expenses that have crept up. without making headlines. Healthcare costs continue their relentless climb. Even if you have employer-sponsored insurance, your premiums, deductibles, and copays have all increased. The average individual deductible for employer-sponsored health insurance went from about $1,655 in 2019 to over $2,200 in 2026. And that's just the deductible, the amount you have to spend before your insurance even starts covering anything. If you actually need health care, you're looking at significantly more out-of-pocket costs. A simple urgent care visit that might have cost you $50 in 2019 could easily run $100 or more today after insurance. Childcare costs have increased by 30 to 40% in many areas. If you have kids, you know this pain intimately. The average cost of center-based childcare now ranges from $10,000 to $20,000 per year per child, depending on your location. For someone making $75,000, that's 13 to 27% of your gross income before taxes. You're literally working to pay someone else to watch your kids so you can work. Utilities have increased across the board. Electricity, water, gas, internet, phone. All of these essential services cost more now than they did in 2019. Your internet bill that was $50 per month, it's probably $70 to $80 now. Your electric bill has increased 20 to 30% depending on where you live. These aren't huge individual increases, but they add up to several $100s per month in additional costs that you didn't have before. Entertainment and subscription services have also inflated. Netflix, Hulu, Disney+, Spotify, Amazon Prime, gym memberships, software subscriptions, all of these have raised their prices. What used to cost maybe $50 to $75 per month for all your subscriptions might now be $100 to $150. And here's the kicker. You probably have more subscriptions than you realize because companies have figured out that $9.99 per month doesn't feel like much. But when you have 10 or 15 of them, it's real money. And here's something that makes this situation even worse. Bracket creep. When your salary increases to keep pace with inflation, or even when it doesn't, you can find yourself pushed into higher tax brackets. The federal tax brackets do adjust for inflation, but those adjustments are based on the CPI, which, as we've established, understates real inflation. Someone making $75,000 in 2026 is paying a higher effective tax rate than someone making the equivalent purchasing power salary in 2019. You're also paying more in Social Security and Medicare taxes because those are calculated on your nominal income, not your real purchasing power. State and local taxes have also increased in many areas. Property taxes, sales taxes, income taxes. Many states and municipalities have raised rates or added new fees to deal with their own budget shortfalls. You might not notice a 0.5% sales tax increase, but over the course of a year, on thousands of dollars of purchases, it adds up. The result is that more of your paycheck is going to taxes, even though your actual purchasing power has decreased. You're making more money on paper, but taking home less. Buying power after taxes. It's a double whammy that leaves you feeling broke despite what looks like a decent salary. Let's talk about something that doesn't show up in any economic data but is absolutely destroying people. The psychological impact of feeling broke despite doing everything right. You went to college, you got a good job, you're making what should be a comfortable salary. And yet, you're stressed about money constantly. This creates a cognitive dissonance that's incredibly damaging. On one hand, you know you're making good money. On the other hand, you can barely afford your life. So what do you conclude? Most people blame themselves. They think they must be terrible with money, or they're not working hard enough, or they're spending too much on luxuries. But here's the truth. You're not bad with money. The game has fundamentally changed, and nobody told you the rules were different now. What worked for your parents' generation doesn't work anymore. The advice you got about budgeting and saving, it was based on an economic reality that no longer exists. This psychological toll manifests in several ways. First, there's the constant background stress of financial insecurity. Even when nothing is actively going wrong, there's this nagging anxiety about whether you can handle the next unexpected expense. Your car making a weird noise? That's not just an inconvenience, it's a potential financial catastrophe. Second, there's the social comparison trap. You see people on social media who seem to be living these amazing lives, traveling, eating out, buying new things, and you wonder how they're affording it. The reality is, many of them are drowning in debt, but you don't see that part. You just see the highlight reel and feel like you're falling behind. Third, there's the future anxiety. You should be saving for retirement, building an emergency fund, maybe saving for a house or your kids' education. But when you're struggling to cover your current expenses, how can you possibly save for the future so you don't? And then you feel guilty and anxious about that too. This constant financial stress doesn't just affect your mental health. It affects your physical health, your relationships, your job performance, and your overall quality of life. You're making $75,000 per year, which should provide a comfortable middle-class lifestyle, but instead you're living in a state of chronic financial anxiety. Here's where this income shift gets truly devastating. It's not just making life harder day to day. It's making wealth building nearly impossible for people in this income bracket. Think about the traditional path to building wealth. You save an emergency fund, you pay off debt, you invest for retirement, you save for a down payment on a house. You build equity. Over time, compound interest and asset appreciation build your wealth. But this entire system is predicated on having excess income after covering your basic expenses. And that's exactly what's disappeared for people making $75,000 in 2026. Let's run through the math. You make $75,000 per year. After federal, state, and local taxes, plus Social Security and Medicare, you're taking home maybe $55,000 to $58,000, depending on your location. That's about $4,750 per month. Your rent or mortgage, $2,100. Groceries, $550. Transportation, $600. Utilities and phone, $300. Insurance, health, car, renters or homeowners, $450. Student loan payment, $300. That's $4,300 per month, and we haven't even talked about entertainment, clothing, personal care, unexpected expenses, or anything else. You're left with $450 per month for everything else in your life. And you're supposed to be building wealth with that? Saving for retirement, building an emergency fund, saving for a down payment, and still having a life? The math doesn't work. This is why people making $75,000 feel broke. They are broke in the sense that they don't have the financial freedom and flexibility that this salary should provide. They're trapped in a cycle where all their income is spoken for before they even get paid. And here's what makes this truly tragic. This is the exact income level where wealth building should be starting to accelerate. This is where you should be building that foundation that grows into real financial security over time. Instead, people at this income level are stuck in neutral, watching their purchasing power erode while they work harder and harder just to maintain the same lifestyle. Now, you might be thinking, okay, things are bad now, but surely this will correct itself, right? Inflation will stabilize, wages will catch up, things will get better. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but there are several structural reasons why this situation is likely to get worse before it gets better. First, housing costs are not coming down. The shortage of housing in desirable areas is a supply and demand problem that won't be fixed anytime soon. We're not building enough new housing, and the housing we are building is often in the luxury or high-end market, not the middle-class market. Unless something dramatic changes, housing costs will continue to consume an ever larger percentage of middle-class incomes. Second, healthcare costs show no signs of slowing down. The U.S. healthcare system is fundamentally broken from a cost perspective, and there's no political will to fix it. Expect healthcare to continue eating up more of your income every year. Third, the wage-to-productivity disconnect is getting worse, not better. Worker productivity has increased dramatically over the past few decades, but wages haven't kept pace. The gains from that increased productivity are going to capital owners and executives, not workers. Unless there's a major shift in labor power, this trend will continue. Fourth, many of the cost increases we're seeing are structural, not cyclical. Climate change is making insurance more expensive. Aging infrastructure requires massive investment. Demographic shifts are putting pressure on social safety nets. These aren't temporary problems that will resolve themselves. They're long-term challenges that will continue to put upward pressure on costs. Finally, the Federal Reserve's approach to managing inflation through interest rate increases makes many of these problems worse for individuals. Higher interest rates mean higher costs for mortgages, car loans, student loans, and credit cards. The people who already own assets benefit from higher interest rates, but people who are trying to build wealth get squeezed even harder. Let me give you some data points that really drive home how dramatic this shift has been. According to research from the Economic Policy Institute, wages for the bottom 90% of earners have barely budged in real terms over the past several years, while costs for essential goods and services have soared. A study from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology calculates what they call a living wage for different areas of the country. In many major metropolitan areas, the living wage for a single adult with no children is now over $60,000 per year. For a family with 2 adults and 2 children, it's over $100,000 per year. These aren't luxury lifestyles. This is literally just enough to cover basic necessities without going into debt. The Federal Reserve's own survey of consumer finances shows that the median American household has about $5,300 in savings. Despite decades of financial advice telling people to save for emergencies, most people can't, because there's nothing left to save. They're not being irresponsible. They're being squeezed by an economic system that no longer works for the middle class. Meanwhile, the wealth gap continues to widen. The top 10% of earners have seen their wealth grow substantially over the past few years, while the bottom 50% have seen their wealth stagnate or decline. This isn't about vilifying successful people. It's about recognizing that the economic system is distributing gains very unevenly, and people making $75,000 are on the wrong side of that distribution. Here's something that really illustrates how much things have changed. Let's compare what $75,000 gets you today versus what the equivalent salary got previous generations. In 1990, the median household income was about $29,900. Adjusting for inflation, that's equivalent to about $70,000 in 2026 dollars. So we're comparing similar income levels across generations. But look at what that $29,900 could buy in 1990 versus what $75,000 can buy today. The median home price in 1990 was $79,100. The average mortgage rate was around 10%, which sounds high, but the monthly payment on that loan was about $695. For someone making $29,900, that's about 28% of their gross income. Today, as we established earlier, someone making $75,000 is spending 35 to 45% of their income on housing. They're spending a larger percentage of their income on a basic necessity despite making more money in nominal terms. College costs are even more dramatic. In 1990, the average cost of tuition, fees, room, and board at a 4-year public university was about $4,600 per year. Today, that same education costs over $25,000 per year. That's a 443% increase, far outpacing both inflation and wage growth. Healthcare costs have followed a similar trajectory. What used to be covered by insurance with minimal out-of-pocket costs now comes with high deductibles, co-pays, and premiums that eat up thousands of dollars per year. The bottom line is this. Previous generations with equivalent incomes had significantly more purchasing power, particularly for the big-ticket items that determine your quality of life and your ability to build wealth. Someone making $75,000 today is objectively worse off than someone making the inflation-adjusted equivalent 30 years ago. Okay, so we've established that you're not crazy. $75,000 really does feel like $40,000, and there are very real structural reasons for this. But knowing why the problem exists doesn't pay your bills. So what can you actually do about it? First, recognize that traditional budgeting advice doesn't work in this environment. The advice to just cut out your daily coffee or stop buying avocado toast is insulting and useless. You're not broke because you're buying $5 lattes. You're broke because your rent is $2,100 and your groceries are $550 and your car payment is $450. Cutting out small luxuries might save you $100 per month, which is great, but it's not solving the core problem. Instead, you need to focus on the big three: housing, transportation, and food. These three categories typically eat up 70 to 80% of your budget. Even small improvements in these areas have massive impacts. Housing. Can you get a roommate? Move to a lower cost area? Negotiate your rent? House hack by renting out a room? I know these aren't ideal solutions, but reducing your housing costs by even $200 to $300 per month creates significant breathing room. That's $2,400 to $3,600 per year you could put toward building wealth instead of making your landlord wealthy. Transportation. Can you drive your current car longer instead of upgrading? Buy used instead of new? Use public transportation or bike for some trips? The average car payment in America is over $700 per month. If you can eliminate or reduce this payment, you've just freed up massive amounts of money. Food. This is where you can actually save significant money without destroying your quality of life. Meal planning, buying in bulk, learning to cook, reducing food waste. These strategies can easily save you $200 to $300 per month. That doesn't mean eating ramen every day. It means being more strategic about how you shop and cook. Second, you absolutely must find ways to increase your income. I know that's easier said than done, but it's crucial. Ask for a raise. Get a better job. Develop skills that are more valuable in the marketplace. Start a side hustle. The reality is that you can't budget your way out of this problem. Your costs are too high relative to your income. You need more income. This might mean having uncomfortable conversations with your boss about compensation. It might mean job hopping to get significant raises. Research shows that people who change jobs get bigger raises than people who stay with the same employer. It might mean investing time and money into developing more valuable skills. Third, be extremely strategic about any additional income you do generate. When you get a raise, don't let your lifestyle inflate to match it. When you get a tax refund or bonus, don't treat it as fun money. This extra income is your opportunity to break out of the paycheck to paycheck cycle, but only if you use it wisely. Put that extra money toward high-interest debt first: credit cards, personal loans, anything above 6 to 7% interest. Then build your emergency fund, then invest for long-term growth. This is how you start building wealth despite the structural disadvantages you're facing. Beyond the practical steps, there's a crucial mindset shift you need to make. You have to stop comparing yourself to the lifestyle expectations that were built around a different economic reality. Your parents might have bought a house at 25, had kids at 28, and retired comfortably at 65. That path probably isn't available to you at the same ages, and that's not your fault. The economy has changed, and you can't beat yourself up for not achieving milestones that are no longer realistic for your generation. This doesn't mean giving up on goals like home ownership or financial independence. It means adjusting your timeline and expectations to match the reality you're living in, not the reality that existed 30 years ago. It also means being honest about what success looks like. Success at $75,000 in 2026 might not be buying a house. It might be paying off your debt and building a 6-month emergency fund. It might not be taking expensive vacations. It might be having enough breathing room in your budget that you're not stressed about money every day. These might not sound like impressive achievements, but given the economic environment you're operating in, they're actually remarkable. You're not failing because you haven't achieved what your parents achieved at your age. You're succeeding by staying afloat in much rougher waters. There's also a political and social element to this mindset shift. Stop internalizing this as a personal failure and recognize it as a systemic problem. Vote for policies that address housing costs, healthcare costs, and wage stagnation. Support unions and worker organizing. Push back on the narrative that everyone is responsible for their own economic success or failure. Individual action is important, but systemic problems require systemic solutions. The fact that $75,000 feels like $40,000 is a failure of our economic and political systems, not a failure of the people experiencing it. Here's the brutal truth that nobody wants to say out loud. Being middle class in America in 2026 means being one or two emergencies away from financial disaster, even when you're making what should be a comfortable salary. $75,000 per year used to mean security. It used to mean you could handle whatever life threw at you. It used to mean you were building wealth and working toward a comfortable retirement. Today, it means you're probably okay as long as nothing goes wrong. But when something does go wrong, your car needs major repairs, you have a medical emergency, you lose your job, you're in serious trouble very quickly. This isn't how it should be. This isn't the deal that was promised to people who worked hard, got educated, and played by the rules. But it is the reality, and pretending otherwise doesn't help anyone. The good news, if there is any good news, is that once you understand what's actually happening, you can make better decisions. You can stop blaming yourself for struggling. You can focus your energy on the things that actually matter instead of beating yourself up about spending $5 on coffee. You can adjust your expectations and your timeline to match reality instead of some idealized version of success that no longer exists. You can also find community with other people who are experiencing the same thing. You're not alone in this struggle, even though it might feel that way. Millions of people making good salaries are feeling broke right now, and there's a power in recognizing that this is a shared experience, not an individual failure. Look, I know this hasn't been the most uplifting video. I haven't given you some magic solution that will suddenly make $75,000 feel like enough again, because honestly, there isn't one. The structural problems we've talked about are real, and they're not going away anytime soon, but knowledge is power. Understanding why you feel broke despite making good money is the first step toward making better financial decisions. It helps you focus on what actually matters: the big expenses, the income increases, the strategic choices about where to live and how to spend your money. It also helps you stop wasting mental energy on guilt and self-blame. You're not bad with money. You're not irresponsible. You're not failing. You're operating in an economic environment that is fundamentally shifted against middle-class wage earners, and you're doing your best to navigate it. So yes, $75,000 feels like $40,000 now. The 2026 income shift is real, and it's making life harder for millions of people. But by understanding what's happening and making strategic decisions about your housing, your transportation, your food, and your income, you can still build a financial foundation that leads to security and eventually wealth. It won't be easy. It will probably take longer than you hoped, but it's possible. And it starts with seeing the situation clearly instead of through the lens of guilt and confusion. If this video helped you understand your financial situation better, share it with someone else who's making decent money but feeling broke. And remember, you're not alone in this. And it's not your fault. The game changed, but you can still win. You just need to know the new rules. Now go take control of your financial future, even if it looks different than you expected it to.